Good evening and welcome to, well, evening, morning, I don't know.
Well, wherever
afternoon.
you are,
It's
just
the entire
depends. Yeah.
dateline, isn't it? You're welcome. Welcome to Untold Radio's Down South Anomalies.
That's
this is
right.
episode 45, To Catch a Flying
Powering
Star,
through.
Australian UFO experiences, and what's
That's the one.
old is new, Aspasia.
Always.
And we will explain tonight that nothing has really changed when we step back nearly 30 years, 28 years, to a program I did for Radio National here in Australia, a radio documentary in the mid-90s.
That's
So
right.
let's just go to our super chat really quickly.
Yes. And
show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
That's right. Send those super chats and stickers now. My name's Jay Katz.
Aspasia.
The beautiful Aspasia. And as we said before, it's episode 45. And as we say every week, we are broadcasting on stolen land.
Yes, we
We're
are.
having a referendum very soon. They haven't given us a date really yet, have they?
No, not yet.
But everyone in this country should be saying yes to our Indigenous culture.
No. People got to say whatever they want to say.
I don't think they should be. But anyway.
Okay.
All right. The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we want to respect and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging.
Yep.
As we do every week.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's so interesting that flutter of news is just out of control. And we had
Doesn't stop.
a couple of really hot interviews up that collapsed on us. One of them I can announce. The other one I'm keeping quiet so I don't curse it.
No.
But Dean Bennett is probably Australia's most unsung
Absolutely.
Stuntman. And he recanted an incredible UFO story to me recently at the Sydney premiere of Rib Spreader, Dick Dale's incredible feature film about the dangers of cigarette smoking and beyond, I think. Anyway, tonight, we were going to have...
Well, we were going to have that. But when he's ended up having to go to Melbourne.
Yes, so we've got
out
him
of the
next
blue,
week.
So we've got him next week. So he will be here. But, the beauty of that was we delved into his background. And
it's just profound.
It is just profound. It's just crazy.
You would have been led to believe in the 70s that Grant Page was the only stuntman in Australia. He seemed to be on everyone's film.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But Dean
and he was amazing.
In there as a kid.
As
Super 8 filmmaking.
Oh, my God.
And he worked on Survivor, directed by David Hemmings.
That's right, which is an amazing film.
It's an incredible
with a paranormal aspect to it. But anyway, but the amazing plane scene that...
Well, they have an entire jumbo jet crash, which is one of the most profound things you're ever going to see recorded on film.
Yep.
Very early in the piece in the late 70s. And Dean was on set as a teenager.
As a child.
Yeah.
Anyway, his story is fascinating. And then he will recant this amazing UFO experience story that he was told by a friend of a security guard that he was working with.
That's right.
Which is a fascinating story.
But we'll get more clarity on that next week.
In
the meantime, we've gone back to a program I did for Radio National with a lot of your assistance behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, yeah.
And it was a potted history of Australian ufological reports.
Yes.
With little tinctures of archival news and a lot of interesting archival news, but some very wacky archival news as well.
And Michael Williams, who went out on the Nullarbor with
Michael Williams was an infrared photographer.
That's right.
And Anthony
Marr, who'd
had experiences
himself, but he was
a brilliant musician.
He was
Sheriff Lindo and Itchy and Scratchy.
Part of Itchy and Scratchy.
And so I did the background music
with him, and it's an amazing sound score. And the whole, you'll hear it. It's really evocative of back in the day, and it was. During the X-Files?
The X-Files hadn't
started yet, but it was about to start. This thing came out on cassette.
Well, it was so much in demand. It was so interested by the population.
But it was on the format.
It was the original cassette.
The format was cassette then. So this is even before CD. So, and then when CDs came in not long after that, and then they pulped all these. They threw them in the garbage. Anyway.
Well, it is in the National Archives. It's not
No. I mean, all the copies that they had that, everybody was changing over so quickly.
To
anyway.
get it online these days, it can cost a fortune.
That's outrageous.
Yeah, it
anyway,
really is.
Anyway.
So in there, to quote Bill Chalker, it really is the history from the Australian government perspective, of containing a controversy.
That's right.
And it always has been that way, and it still is that way today. But this is prior
not much has changed, has it?
to the mobile phone and the internet, really. I mean, the internet was in its infancy.
Yes, it was.
The mobile phone had
right.
really not hit people's hands apart from those huge bricks with antennas on them.
Yeah.
And lots of interviews. We actually got a chance to interview Bob Grant, whose mother was the secretary in SAC, the Strategic Air Command at the time, and speaks about the 1952 encounter.
Washington,
which
buzzing,
was incredible for 2 weeks. That is unbelievable. We also hear from our Indigenous culture. Norm Grogan speaks about the family in the Min Min Light. We've got a pilot in there, military and civilian pilots.
Lots of different
commercial
stories
pilot,
from different.
Alan Hennessy.
Yeah, from different sectors of the community.
And just lots of great reports from tenacious, pragmatic individuals from all across the country.
Yeah.
A lot of those people living off the land.
So,
Michael Williams' research did feature in 40 in Times the Wonderful Weirdness of Oz issue, which is 213.
It's from August 2006. That was when it came out.
And so there's his great photos he took in the Nullarbor of what looks like the space critters, the critters out of Nope, Trevor James Constable and Wilhelm Reich. And they were in an area that researchers like Paul Devereaux would have called an Earthlight area.
All right, we need to move along, otherwise we're never going to get it all. So
now,
what did you want to...
Initially at the start here, I wanted to play a little piece I'd slipped across recently by the incredible author Philip K. Dick, the man behind Blade Runner, Scanner Darkly, you name it, Minority Report. This is the genius. And mind you, he was doing a lot of Quaaludes in his day, but he talks about...
I think that was the doorway. The Quaaludes
the doorway
were the doorway
to perception, or as Huxley to call it that. But he spoke at a sci-fi convention in France in the late 70s and announced, probably coming off the back of that astounding book, Valis, that he was having time slippage, something that I think that could be something that may be occurring to Auburn there from Radio Nordica. We're going to have to check that out.
Yeah, we will.
But this is literally, the world is a simulation before anyone else articulated it. And it's the Mandela effect. So let's have a listen to Philip K. Dick before we go into the incredible audio documentary. Now, tonight, for those people listening on audio, you get a feast. We can go and make dinner whilst we've got that running, so we get a bit of a break.
There's no visuals.
But you can just lie back and meditate to this, and hopefully you'll enjoy that complex electronic score I did with Anthony Marr.
Or a UFO will land on you.
In the meantime, let's have a few words from Philip K. Dick about the Mandela effect before it occurred. Isn't that ironic?
It's okay. It's okay. The subject of this speech is a topic which has been discovered recently and which may not exist at all. I may be talking about something that does not exist. Therefore, I'm free to say everything or nothing. I, in my stories and novels, often write about counterfeit worlds, semi-real worlds, as well as deranged private worlds, inhabited often by just one person, while meantime the other characters either remain in their own worlds throughout or are somehow drawn into one of the peculiar ones. This theme occurs in the corpus of my 27 years of writing. At no time did I have a theoretical or conscious explanation for my preoccupation with these pluriform pseudo-worlds, but now I think I understand. What I was sensing was the manifold of partially actualized realities lying tangent to what evidently is the most actualized one, the one which the majority of us, by consensus gentium, agree on. Later that day, back home again, but still deeply under the influence of the sodium pentothal, I had a short, acute flash of recovered memory. Then, in mid-March, a month later, the total body of memories, intact and entire, began to return. You are free to believe me or to disbelieve, but please take my word on it that I am not joking. This is very serious, a matter of importance. At that time, I had no idea what I was seeing. It resembled nothing that I had ever heard described. It resembled plasmic energy. It had colors. It moved fast. It collected and then dispersed. But what it was, what he was, I am not sure even now. In other words, it's a common theme in my writing that a dark-haired girl shows up at the door of the protagonist and tells him that his world is delusional, that there's something false about it. Well, this did finally happen to me. I even knew that her hair would be black. I had an actual complete sense of what she would look like and what she would say. She did appear. She was a total stranger, and she did inform me of this fact, that some of my fictional works were in a literal sense true. I wrote out these dreams in novel after novel, story after story. To name two in which this prior ugly present obtained most clearly, I cite The Man in the High Castle and my 1974 novel about the U.S. as a police state called Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. I'm going to be very candid with you. I wrote both novels based on fragmentary residual memories of such a horrid slave state world. People claim to remember past lives. I claim to remember a different, very different present life. I know of no one who has ever made this claim before, but I rather suspect that my experience is not unique. What perhaps is unique is the fact that I am willing to talk about it. We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
That
Okay.
is incredible.
So that
really.
was in 1977 in France that he was
1977 in
making that
France,
speech.
yeah.
Now, you were showing me a whole bunch of clips the other day.
That is impossible. It's just done a great piece
They
on
have,
bits
yeah.
of, what looks like the Matrix glitching.
Well, that people.
And I can't accept for 1 second logically that this could be
Well,
a
none of this is
simulation.
logic.
Why would you do the depth of pain and suffering that people have to go through in this? Why wouldn't you just
I don't
tone
know,
that
because
back a little?
well, why would you? If we have the
No, I
if
don't
we
know.
have that capacity, you just
Anyway, but it's a
test it all out.
fascinating thing, and
Yeah.
what an extraordinary mind. And out of most science fiction writers, I think that Philip K. Dick, no matter how you want to interpret him
Mhm.
as a drug-fueled madman or someone with pure insight,
Mm.
he probably had more clarity on the way the future was going than most futurists and science
Absolutely.
fiction writers
For sure.
ever did, that
Mhm.
romanticized their work. There's a sense of realism, and it resonates with the population.
It
It really
does.
does.
It does,
Terminator and
absolutely.
all
Yeah.
those films,
Well,
heavily
did you do
influenced.
Terminator?
I don't know if it's Terminator, but the one about Mars, he certainly
I don't know.
was based on Philip
Okay.
K. Dick's work, but definitely Blade Runner,
Oh, Blade Runner.
Scanner
yeah.
Darkly,
Yeah, 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 all
Minority
that. Yeah,
Report,
yeah, yeah,
all
those
that
things.
sort of stuff.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
before we go there, let's talk about these light beams that are occurring in Peru.
Mhm.
This story is not going away, and it certainly does not look like has anything to do with people going there jumping on gold in the area.
Okay.
Now, I realized you learn, as we always have that piece with Robert Anton Wilson telling us to, don't believe your own
reassessing
BS,
everything all the time.
reassess. So this village is quite remote. I think it's about 18 kilometers away from anywhere that you could call for help by boat. So you are in trouble.
Yeah.
And, this seems to have been occurring, not just for the past month, but for many,
For a little
many
while.
years. So what I did was I came across a piece from the incredible channel. Go and check them out, UAP Brazil.
Right.
And this is in Brazil. I think it's around 2013, but this is very similar activity. Let's just get a little glimpse of this now.
Yeah.
And maybe put the mic on. I'll talk over the top because the translation's not in English, but there's subtitles.
Okay.
Let's go. All right. So even though this is dated, it's really odd. Now, can you pronounce the village?
Which one? Oh, hang on. Oh. No.
Village. Now, this is an account of a being that hit a beam of light from an unidentified phenomena.
Okay.
And it actually is taking out these young ladies. It actually, one of them had a miscarriage after the incident. It seems to roll into this village at about 9 p.m., 10 p.m. It's luminescent, it's folding in on itself.
Right.
Before you know it, it's firing these what appear to be laser beams at them. So it's very difficult to get the complete truth on this situation, especially in Peru.
Yeah.
This is much earlier information, but it looks like that this area for decades, the phenomena seems to be taking advantage of the fact that these people are in a remote area.
Yeah.
And we know from the Australian wilderness, there seems to be, is it the fact that people are more perceptive, that they're aware of their environment much better, or is it the fact that the phenomena is exploiting their remoteness?
Yeah.
It's really odd, and none of us can really tell. I think we'll get rid of that footage, but go and look at UAP Brazil, and it's very interesting, the information that's coming out of there. Right. What I do know now is that whether it was the Navy or the Army that went in, it was only a few of them, and they didn't do much of a report. They just debunked it with, you jet packing, gold mining, claim jumpers.
Yeah.
But the truth of the fact is that it hasn't stopped. And so now the community itself is going out at night en masse trying to hunt down the pelicatus or whatever you call them.
Yeah. The face peelers.
The face peeler. There is this really graphic footage of one body being removed from the water that we don't want to look at.
You don't have to see that.
So without any further ado, this is the first time we're going completely to something that's audio. We're just going to have the title card, which is basically what was on the cassette in the retail shops, the ABC shops.
Yeah.
28, 29 years ago. And you're going to hear a much younger Jay Katz under my other name, Jaimie Leonarder, because this
your
is
real name.
Aspasia Leonarder. Well, what's in a name, actually.
What is in a name?
So without any further ado, thank you for tuning in and being with us for episode 45. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we will have Australia's most obscure yet one of their most profound stuntmen. And
with a fascinating story.
With a fascinating UFO story. And then we've got some really exciting guests.
Yeah, we keep saying that every week. But anyway.
I know we do, but we do.
Every week is exciting.
Yes.
All right.
Okay,
here we go.
Thank you, Aspasia.
Bombarded by objects from outer space. Bits and pieces of the universe piercing our atmosphere in an invasion that never ends. In every moment of every day they come, from planets belonging to stars whose dying light is too far away to be seen. From infinity they come.
They were travelling side by side, just travelling like in a pattern, yeah, across the sky.
That looks unbelievable, doesn't it? But it's a pretty accurate recreation of probably the most amazing UFO sighting ever in Australia, or for that matter, anywhere else.
We do actually have photographs. I mean, I know of photographs that have been taken by military planes. They hide them primarily because they're frightened of admitting they don't know what's going on.
It must have been traveling at incredible speed since it disappeared out of sight in a matter of a second or two. Now, I wouldn't want to say that this was one of those so-called flying saucers, but whatever it was an object and not an illusion.
Hello and welcome. My name's Jaimie Leonarder. I'm an independent UFO researcher with ALERT, the Anomalous Light and Energy Research Team. The first reported UFO sighting of the modern era was by a civilian pilot, Kenneth Arnold, over Mount Rainier in Washington State. It was June 1947. Arnold claimed to have seen 9 teardrop-shaped objects flying in formation. He likened their movement to saucers skimming across the surface of a lake. His sighting received worldwide media attention, and through Arnold's description of these objects, the term flying saucer entered popular consciousness.
My name is Chief Frank Buckshot Standing Horse. I am an Ottawa Indian. In 1959, on July the 12th, I took a trip in a flying saucer. This saucer I went up into to Mars, over the moon, Venus, Clarion, and Orion. When I say Orion, I do not mean Orion. It is a planet outside of our galaxy. And I was gone 4 days and 4 nights and 2 half nights. The captain of the Via Omus, which is the name of this flying saucer, her name was Mandra Olika, a very beautiful woman. She gave me the age of 417 years old. That was in 1959. She was tall, dark-complected, beautiful blue eyes, well-shaped, and she certainly was blessed with beauty.
The climate of paranoia during the Cold War meant that such sightings were often interpreted as Soviet incursions into American airspace. The emerging nuclear threat made them all the more terrifying. During the Second World War, there'd also been a theory that the Nazis had managed to manufacture flying saucers, which operated out of bases in the polar ice caps. In mid-1952, one of the most famous unidentified radar and visual sightings occurred over Washington, D.C. Veteran Hollywood journalist Bob Grant remembers his mother coming home from her job in the Pentagon, convinced that an invasion was imminent, a proposition apparently taken seriously by the United States Air Force.
After a 1 year's investigation, I believe that the flying saucers seen by veteran airline and Air Force pilots are objects from another planet. The Air Force itself has officially admitted that flying saucers exist. This statement appears in Project Saucer Case number 75. Not only that, the Air Force has officially analyzed the motives of possible visitors from space. Here is a direct quotation from the official report. Such a civilization might observe that on Earth we now have atomic bombs in our fast-developing rockets. In the past history of mankind, they should be alarmed. We should therefore expect at this time above all to behold such visitation.
At the time, I was just about ready to get out of high school, and my mother at the time was working in the Pentagon for the Strategic Air Command, and who to better be interested in aerial phenomena than SAC. While it was very highly classified, she would come home in the evenings, particularly after the first sighting, just totally pale. She couldn't talk about any of it, but all the color was drained from her face. And everybody in the Pentagon, in Strategic Air Command, was certain at that point that we were being invaded from outer space. These things were appearing. They were on radar. They scrambled fighters. The fighters would lock their radar and their armament onto these targets, and they would just simply move out of the way. They would fly off. They would go straight up. They would go to one side. It was just absolutely nothing tangible. But it was confirmed with the radar lock from the fighter planes, from ground radar, from civilian radar at the international airport, Washington International, and visual sightings from the ground and from the tower. So whatever it was, and if they know what it was, they're still not saying, at least I haven't heard, they were certainly frightened by it.
Inflating an immense balloon aboard the USS Norton Sound, the Navy prepares for further study of the elusive cosmic rays somewhere in the Pacific. That's the news. A secondary consideration clears up the mystery of the so-called flying saucers. For it is these monsters, which rise 19 miles and attain diameters of 100 feet, that have been mistaken for the apparitions called flying saucers. At great altitudes, they tell us, these elongated enormities flatten out like plates. Mystery ended.
Sightings of anomalous aerial phenomena are most often associated with North America, but Australia has a long history of observations and was one of the first countries to establish a UFO research centre. In 1930, Sir Francis Chichester reported seeing a strange object over the Tasman Sea, and Australia has written accounts dating back to the mid-19th century. The oral history of Australia's Aboriginal people has long incorporated unknown or inexplicable moving lights and objects in the sky. The Min Min lights, as they are often called, are also an important part of many a bush yarn. Accounts of these lights are common in northwest Queensland. Murray broadcaster Norm Grogan remembers an incident from his childhood.
They've been around for thousands of years because there are actually paintings that are dating back a few thousand years depicting Min Min light, and it's handed down through, storytelling through generations that the Min Min light is there, and if you go out in the bush, be careful of it. You always get warnings that the Min Min light is there, it's always present, and it's just associated with spirits, evil spirits, so therefore you're not to tangle with it. And it's a deterrent when you're little. If you're playing around and your parents don't want you to be mucking around, they say, watch out, the Min Min light's going to come get you. When I was growing up in Cairns, we went out camping with Dad and Mum and the uncles and brothers and sisters quite often. So. And some of the ways they discipline you from wandering off too far in the bush. Don't go over there, there's a Min Min light over there, we're going to come get you, So that way, you know from when you're little that Min Min light is bad. It's got spirits, bad spirits, so you don't play with that because the spirits might steal you away from your family, so you just don't want to be involved with it. Going back a few years when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I think it was, and we quite often went across to Mount Isa from Cairns to see my mother's brother, my uncle, out of Mount Isa, and his family. We used to go and spend school holidays with them. And, we'd pack the whole car up and have 10 of us kids in there, all packed in with the dog even, So we'd go through, and in those days, between Cairns and Mount Isa, the old Stuart Highway as it was in, it was all dirt. It wasn't sealed, so every wet season we'd go across just before Christmas. So there was quite a bit of rain on there, and there's always mud, so you're really taking it in your own hands, to travel along there, your own safety. So we'd go along and get through the tracks and everything, and then the particular instance was one night we were driving along, and we came across, I think, some bikies, and we passed them, and then, everybody was saying, oh, look, bikies are there, quite a few of them. I can't remember exactly. It must be about half a dozen or so. But they were all on their big choppers and everything, and we passed them and waved to them, and this is really dark now. And so we headed along the highway, and we suddenly came to a really muddy patch, and it was sort of on a downhill run. And we were stuck in there, and all of us had to get out. There was 11 of us in the car. No, 13 actually, counting Mum and Dad. So. And we jumped out, and I was still sitting in the car because I was small, second youngest at that stage. My little baby sister was with us. And everybody else was out of the car, and they were pushing. And so Dad was out pushing, directing all the other kids. And then suddenly we thought, oh, he's a bit of help. This car coming. And we thought, oh, yeah. And we were watching. We thought it might have been a truck because it was really high above the horizon, the little hump up on the horizon we came down the hill. And then we thought, no, it's too high for a truck. Could be the bikies. So yeah, it could be the bikies. And then we thought, no, that's too bright and too high. And then all of a sudden, it just sat on the hill, and we thought, well, what are they waiting for? Because they were coming up very fast, and stopped and then looking down at us. So we stopped. Everybody outside stopped trying to lifting the car out of the bog. So they thought, well, we'll wait till the bikies come. They can save their energy. So they were waiting. We were all waiting, and it seemed like probably 20 minutes or so or whatever. And then we suddenly realised, hang on, what are they doing up there? And then we suddenly see the light sort of darting off the road, off the dirt track. And we think, where are they going, because it's only just mud all around. And then I think Dad said, oh, quick everybody, get in the car, come on, let's get the car going. And he clicked on, and he said, it's a Min light. And we thought, hey? We were all like, come on, hurry up. We were just packing it, And we eventually got the car out of the bog, and we took off, and it was following us for a little while, and then came up. As I said, it just keeps an equal distance so that you can't get a good look at it, and you can't get too close to it, because it somehow knows that you're watching, and it's not going to come up and give you that chance to work it out, whatever it is. So we all got in the car, and we were all like relieved, and panicking, and yeah, we're getting away, but it was following us. But then when it finally left, we were like, oh, thank God it's gone,
Given the long history of unusual aerial sightings in Australia, it's not surprising that there is also a lively culture of independent research. One of the most highly regarded researchers in Australia is Bill Chalker. Bill is an industrial chemist and uses scientific skills to search for physical traces at sites of reported incidents.
I've been sort of interested in one form or another since about the mid-60s. I suppose I started collecting stories about them and clipping out newspaper clippings as a kid. At that time, in the mid-60s, there was a lot of widespread UFO activity, not only in Australia but overseas. It was a topic of a lot of interest, and it generated a number of popular books. And at that stage, I suppose I had an increasing interest in what I thought was scientific mysteries and things like this. And to me, UFOs seemed to represent something that was a real challenge to science, something really quite extraordinary going on. And as it turned out, 1966 was also the scene of a wave of UFO sightings in my own sort of hometown local area of Grafton on the north coast of New South Wales, and just about half the town saw UFOs. Not myself, which is a bit of a pity, but it certainly sparked a bit more interest that something was happening on my own home turf, and so I gradually started to develop a little bit more interest in it, and started to really get into the literature in a big way, and found that certainly there was a lot of rubbish and a lot of really silly stuff written about the phenomenon, but in amongst it all there was a real lot of interesting material, and so the interest became more and more pronounced, and certainly I started to become actively doing sort of field work in the late 1960s. I went through University of New England with a science degree, and I majored in chemistry and mathematics, and I suppose that background gives you some sense of discipline in interpreting sort of unusual phenomena, and certainly it gives me pause in terms of evaluating things. I try to critically evaluate things, and I work on the assumption that if there's a real anomalous phenomenon involved, and if it survives a critical gauntlet, then it's fairly worthwhile looking into and examining. Given that approach, I can certainly still say that there is an incredible amount of information out there that stands the test of time and stands up to really critical evaluation. The various skeptics and things like that, they're fond of saying that basically the only reason that there is a UFO phenomenon is this unexplained residue. When you do examine that residue, the reason why the residue is there is that it is definitely unexplained. It's truly anomalous.
Widespread access to portable video cameras and ease of operation has meant an increasing body of documentation for researchers. Many tapes are similar to this one recorded outside of Newcastle in New South Wales.
It's exactly the same thing, no? It's gone out again. It's the same thing. It's going on and off. The shape is exactly the same.
That's what he was saying. One went out, the other one went brighter, and the other one went out, and it went bright, they went...
Bring up...
There's another one. Here comes another one.
Look over the hill here. Get this one over the hill. I just got to find this one.
And the other one's going back towards us now.
You know how that's going in and out, Mo? That wasn't Michael, that's them things. Yeah. That's one.
It's going down towards the other one. Look.
Just watch them two, Dad.
Keep it recording on and it's going towards it.
I've lost the buggers.
Well, in 1973, we were living at the Central Coast, the entrance. We'd gone to bed at night, and I went to sleep, and the next minute I was in a spacecraft, and we had very large windows, and there were seats, like a seat attached to the wall. There were people sitting on those seats in a trance-like state. I was on like an operating table. There were quite a number of these tables, but I was the only person on any of the tables. And on either side of me, I had two alien men, I presume. They were about your height, but they had dressed in silver suits, and they had no visible mouth or nose, and they just had two slits here for the eyes, and they seemed to speak by emitting a sound from their throat. And they were pummeling my stomach, and they really hurting me, and I was very upset. And I sort of said, well, you don't have to hurt me, you know, let's be friends sort of thing. And they ignored me as though I was a bug on the table.
Most commentators would argue that Australia's right up there amongst the leading countries in terms of UFO phenomena. I can certainly vouch for the fact that there is a lot of interesting phenomenon that's been going on in Australia for a long, long time, and there's certainly been no shortage of UFO sightings. I guess the earliest, to me, is one of the more striking ones as well. And I'm going back before the modern popularisation of the UFO phenomenon, that's 1947. To me, there are two... I've always had an interest, by the way, in terms of historical pre-1947 reports, because most people have argued, or a lot of commentators have argued, that the UFO phenomenon is like a space-age answer to our fears and concerns, etc., that it's essentially a modern hysteria. Look at it from the point of view of here we are stepping into our own sort of space age. Obviously we're going to be seeing UFOs and aliens all over the place, and that it is a form of hysteria. And so it becomes interesting to look at pre-1947 sightings that predate the space age. And what's interesting is that in amongst that, particularly in the early part of the century and last century, there are various events that seem to fit into what appears to be UFO phenomena today. And for example, one that occurred in 1868, and this is one of the few that have been able to document in a lot of detail, involved a Parramatta surveyor, Frederick William Birmingham, and he was twice alderman on Parramatta Council. He was an engineer to the council. He did all sorts of technical drawings for the council, so he's no flake, basically, so he seemed to be well regarded. But here was this, I was given a copy of what appeared to be a memorandum book or a diary written by this fellow, and at first I thought it was some form of literary hoax, and I sort of thought it was fascinating. I wrote about it a little bit to at least put it on record at the time, but I always felt a little bit suspicious about it. As it turned out, there was nothing at all in this memorandum book or diary that was inconsistent with what it appeared to be, and that was an authentic record of the day. What he described was seeing what appeared to be what he called a flying ark, or as he said, a machine to go through the air, which appeared to land in Parramatta Park. And he also described what he said was a spirit in a neutral dress or frock, presumably in those days was something like a full-length tunic or something like that. And this spirit, which ostensibly was a humanoid type person, invited him on board, and he was, according to his description of it, flown through the air and landed gently on the ground near the ark where it had landed. And he was taken on board by this spirit and shown around and shown papers, and these papers had some engineering relevance or something. He didn't know it at the time, but he was shown equations, and it was years later when he was working on some engineering work for the Parramatta Council that he came across those same equations that he had seen several years earlier inside this strange ark. So there was a certain degree of a high level of weirdness about this story, but it nevertheless captured many of the elements that we see today in modern abduction accounts, which is all the rage today. And here we have an event that occurred way back in 1868.
Bill Chalker. Here's how Frederick Birmingham wrote about the incident some years later. The spirit appeared like a neutral tint shade and the shape of a man in his usual frock dress. I was shown around the ark, after which the spirit disappeared, and I fell, I suppose, into my usual sleeping state, waking next morning deeply impressed with the vision of the night. It's tantalising to ponder whether the equation that Birmingham came across in that mysterious craft may have ended up being used in the construction of local government buildings. We may never know how credible a witness Frederick Birmingham was, and it's the credibility of witnesses which is often called into question.
I was walking home from my mates at about 9:30. I was coming down Common Avenue at West Ryde, and I looked in the sky and there was this object there. I thought it was just standing still, so I stood still to see if it was moving or not, and it wasn't, it was just there. And then I started going home again, and then it moved across over towards Parramatta Way from West Ryde. And then it was real clear when I first seen it, and by the time I went to Parramatta, another one come along and they both just stopped there. And then me brother and me went down the road to have a look and see if there's any more that we seen before that. And then we come back and they were both just gone.
Circular aircraft.
It is more difficult to disregard the testimonies of those who are trained observers, astronomers, pilots, and aircraft controllers, for example. Clyde Tombaugh, the American astronomer who at the age of 24 discovered the planet Pluto, would later state publicly that he had observed many UFOs. In a moment, Australian pilot Alan Hennessy, a flyer with over 5,000 hours in both military and civilian craft, describes a couple of unexplained incidents from his career.
Well, if anyone still doubts the existence of flying saucers, they'll have to contend with fairly strong evidence produced by scientists on board the Anglo-French supersonic airliner Concorde.
The Concorde was flying at about 55,000 feet over Chad in Africa at a speed of 1,437 miles an hour. A team of scientists was aboard. The job was to photograph the eclipse of the sun from the most favorable position. And so a series of pictures were taken during the period of total eclipse. When they were developed, they showed a strange, luminous, round object. It was higher than the plane and about 10 miles distant, according to Monsieur Claude Poer, chief of the rocketry division of the French Center for Space Study. And an exhaustive analysis of angles and speeds showed later that it had a diameter of about 650 feet.
The first instance of seeing something I didn't quite understand was in Darwin in, I think from memory, late 1978. I'd just come off a shift We're just meeting in the beer garden of the officers' mess, and no, we weren't intoxicated, and ordering the first beer and just sitting back waiting for it to be delivered. And it was after dark. The sun had gone down about an hour or so earlier, and a very bright light appeared from roughly west-northwest at altitude, travelling very fast, about the speed we knew and had experienced before satellites travel. And said, oh, look, a satellite, sun reflecting on the satellite. It was so bright that it really stood out against the now just starting to become visible stars. And we watched it, and it stopped straight above us. And it wasn't a case of, we've fixed our gaze on something that was now stationary. This thing actually stopped. And as we watched it, it turned about 130, 140 degrees to the right and just took off again at twice the speed. Now, I knew that satellites didn't do that. People said, oh, it was at night, it was autokinesis, which is the apparent movement of lights at night. It wasn't that. And we looked at each other and proceeded to have a few beers. And
well, could you describe the shape that you saw? Was it a shape, or was it an outline? What kind of visual picture can you give us?
Just like a very bright star. And if you are looking all the time, you will see them go from almost horizon to horizon. They are just simply satellites. It's just like a very bright star. But at that time of the evening, it was much brighter than the stars which were just becoming visible.
What kind of discussion went on amongst you? I mean, you're all experienced pilots or airmen, presumably. What sort of culture existed there to sort of talk about that in a serious way, other than, just amongst the people who experienced it? Was there a way to sort of acknowledge it officially?
No, we didn't discuss it at length. There was another pilot with us at that stage. I wasn't qualified as an Air Force pilot, although I had a private licence. There were a couple of other air traffic controllers. We didn't discuss it for more than a minute or so. We just changed the subject. I think it was a mutual mental decision that we weren't going to discuss this, and nothing was reported, because what on earth were we going to say? Sitting in the beer garden, saw strange lights. Again, perhaps fear of ridicule. About 3 or 4 years ago, when I was flying the 767 with Qantas, it was a daylight trip up through the centre. Then we're on our Darwin-Singapore leg, and we were getting off in Singapore in a few hours' time. It was about an hour or so before sunset. A lot of the typical towering cumulus you see in the tropics. And as pilots want, we stare out the window a lot, because the things out there that kill you, not much inside will. And it was a large towering cumulus, bigger than the others, off the right wing, and it was about, I would estimate, 30, 40 miles away. And as I looked at it, I don't know what drew my attention to it, but as I looked at it, this large object appeared out of it. It was like half a large football, I suppose, but it was, I would say, a couple of 100 feet high. From what I saw of it, stuck out about 300 or 400 feet out from the cloud, and it wasn't part of the cloud. It was metallic, it shone, it glinted, and stuck out of the cloud, not fully, stayed there for a short while, then retracted back into the cloud. When it was sticking out, I called the captain's attention to it, and he looked over, looked at each other, and we both said, right. Didn't know what to think, didn't know what to say, called the flight service director up the front, and we said, what do you think of that? And he looked at us both and said, I'm not here, and wandered out down the back again. As far as I know, no other reports were made by the crew. Nothing was reported from the passengers, I think mainly because they were asleep, some of them were asleep. We didn't report it, we basically forgot. It was one of those things where you see and it's not discussed. It wasn't discussed anymore.
Was there any other evidence that you came across in your time with Qantas that showed that perhaps the company did recognise that there were incidents and events going on that they needed to deal with, but weren't kind of acknowledging that publicly or even within the company itself?
In the time I spent with Qantas, it was about 5 years, I saw no recordings of reports from pilots of seeing certain things. We had aircraft incident reports, air safety incident reports, which were summarised, but there was no mention of unusual aerial sightings or strange phenomenon. It was like it never happened. Now, one might say, well, it wasn't reported because nothing was ever reported. I know things were reported to colleagues, but they weren't reported to the company. We didn't report that sighting. Now the opportunity exists to be able to tell people who perhaps can confirm that what you saw was real because they've had similar experiences, and they think, oh, thank heavens, it wasn't just me.
We have about 4 objects I've been in the system for over an hour in the vicinity of Edwards, Victorville. Actually, they're pretty close to over Sanford, too. Everybody around has had radar and visual obs on them, and they're flashing lights, etc. Running in the vicinity of 4 to 12,000 feet, various observations. Your first one was 135. Your second one should have been about a 145. I have one in that area. You have one in that area also? 3 of them in a row. Hey. About 145. Okay, March approach spinning these 3 also. Right. If you have one at 090, we do not have that one, but we do have the other 2. The tower? Yes, it's Eugene. I mean, that one. If you look to the north of us, there's one coming pretty fast. Actually, this thing is moving. And he's coming from north to south. He's north going south. He's right over the runway. He's right over your runway? He's about to pass over the way he's moving. There's something right over Edwards at this time. I got a piece of data.
Sounds of an alert at Edwards Air Force Base in the 1950s, and pilot Alan Hennessy describing a number of his experiences. Former NASA scientist Dr. Richard Haynes has made an extensive study of pilot accounts, documented through radar and visual sightings, evidence which appears to be overlooked by academia and the military. Bill Chalker has had unprecedented access to Royal Australian Air Force documentation of similar sightings and comments on how this information tends to be handled.
UFO or unidentified flying object watchers will have to make their own investigations of sightings following the RAF's announcement that it won't be getting involved in the future. The Minister for Defence has limited the Air Force to investigating phenomena which suggest defence or national security implications.
I think, unfortunately, the military situation has been characterised more of a case of containing a controversy. The military obviously want to be giving the appearance of being in control of the environment that they're responsible for, and that, in the case of the Air Force, is our airspace. They had basically a formula that they would operate to. They would examine sightings, etc., but there was no evidence of real serious science being involved in the RAAF's investigations of UFOs. Their final rationalisation, the best response they had to the UFO problem, which they could never effectively manage, was to ignore it.
Army fighter planes are on patrol for flying saucers. Cameras installed to photograph them. Portland, Oregon, the area from which came the first weird reports. This flying saucer patrol shows how the Air Forces, while not putting too much stock in the mysterious things in the sky, are investigating. The control tower's in touch and on the watch. So are a whole lot of people these days. They're seeing flying saucers everywhere. Flocks of fantastic discs flying through the air. Is there something to it? Or is it an epidemic of people just seeing things? Even the goat seems to be looking for the mysterious discs, and the bear's on the alert. Or maybe there's a flying saucer with milk.
While the military and scientific communities reluctantly deal with vast amounts of evidence, in the popular consciousness, reports of anomalous aerial phenomena are still common. In preparing this program, we gathered dozens of written and oral accounts from all over Australia, many people describing their extraordinary experiences for the first time.
It was in September 1969 when I was working at NRN 11 in Coffs Harbour. I was a newsreader there at the time. Anyway, one of the technicians came in one evening and he said, there appears to be a rather strange light in the sky, and it was twinkling. So we went out and had a look at it. And where the television station is in Coffs Harbour, it's fairly remote from the town, and it's on a hilltop. But anyway, we went out and I had a look at it, and I'd taken the binoculars from the supervisor's office, and we looked at this object in the sky, and it was stationary, and it was twinkling. And as I was watching from somewhere in the off to its right-hand side, appeared a light, and the light was just gradually going, and it went straight into the object that was twinkling. And then I handed the binoculars back to the technician. There were 3 or 4 techs by this time, and the others saw this light, or another light, or several lights, and they all appeared to just vanish into the light that was the bigger light that was there. They couldn't get anything terribly accurate on it, but it was there, and these lights did come from all directions.
Metallic or light-reflecting surface, circular or elliptical in shape, flat on the bottom and domed on the top.
I wanted to relate something that happened to me back in '74. So it's quite a long time ago, but it's like something that I've never forgotten. It's just affected me so deeply. I was living in Edithvale, and I was going off to a party in Essendon. That's about an hour's drive. And myself and the kids in the back, and I was in the passenger seat with my young 3-year-old on my lap, and my partner was driving. And about a quarter of an hour into the journey, I started to notice this light, and I thought, oh, well, it's a star or something, and it was sort of moving in an odd way, and I really checked it out. So during the hour's journey, I was really becoming more fascinated with this light, because it didn't seem like a normal sort of a star or whatever. We got to the party, everyone went inside, and hellos, and I just thought, I just wanted to go outside and see if that light, just what was it? And I went outside, and I had quite a large yard, and I was standing out there, and there was this light, and it was moving like in a jerky sort of a manner. It was going horizontally, then it would jump up vertically, and then it would hover, and all the time it was sort of coming closer, and it was like, I think it was quite far away, but I could see quite clearly that it was the shape of a dome, sort of, a typical flying saucer, though I'm loath to say that, it sounds so stupid. And then I became aware, it was like a connection between myself and this object, and it was like they were observing me. Now, all the time I'm in the yard, I'm yelling out, hey, you guys, come out here, because I didn't want to let my connection go. I didn't want to stop looking at it. I didn't want it to go away. And so the only one out there was my 3-year-old son. And I suppose it was for about 3 minutes, this connection was there, and I just was very aware that they were looking at me. Whatever it was very friendly. And then the connection broke, and it started sort of whizzing all over the sky from one side to the other.
7,000 miles an hour measured on radar.
The 6 of us were seeing some relatives off out the front of our house, and we live just off the coast a bit, and it's nice and dark. You see the stars pretty easily. And we saw a red light coming over, and I've done a bit of flying, and I thought, if we do get a few combat aircraft occasionally from Ambley coming over, and I thought, well, it looks like an F-111. But it was at a reasonable altitude. It looked like probably about 10,000 feet or so. And I thought, that's strange, I can't hear it. And as we sort of watched it go over, another one appeared. And eventually 4 or 5 lights line astern came across, pretty evenly spaced. Well, okay, we watched them go along, and they sort of got probably about 20 or 30 k's away, pretty high up. And the second light just stopped, remained stationary. The others continued. After the second light was stationary for probably about a minute or so, it then took off at 90 degrees to the original direction it was travelling. In frustration, I called the cooling out of control tower, and they'd had other calls of the sighting, but couldn't explain it. Called the Bureau of Meteorology the next day. They said they did have one balloon up in the area, but that was recovered, and that was carrying a white light, not a red light. So I called the Amberley RAF base. They had no scheduled military flights that evening. So it was really quite a frustrating thing. We just couldn't explain it, and couldn't even hear there's any sound attached to the lights.
I was walking in from my front gate and just stepped on the veranda. I noticed a gold-orange light appearing over my neighbour's roof, and it was on a downward course. It was coming directly towards me. As my veranda is only about 15 metres from the neighbour's fence, I thought, whatever's happening, and it was coming straight down at me. And I thought, well, this idiot, whatever it is going to crash into my house. And I dashed up the 2 or 3 steps, grabbed my glasses to put on, and as I turned around, it went up through my veranda, almost transparent. And as it raised up, I saw the undercarriage, which appeared to have a couple of small skis on it, and it was elliptical in shape, the whole UFO or whatever it was, and it was a grey shadow. And over 20 years ago, I saw one go down past my house. There were 4 of us sitting in the den looking out of a window, and it was about 200 feet in those days above the main road. And I called out, look at the flying saucer. It was painted green. It was shaped like an aeroplane, but no wings and a fuselage. It was all lit up inside, and there was a very, very black personal object sitting in it. And as I said, look at it quickly, it just disappeared. And there were reported 200 sightings at that stage. I rang the chap here who does the research on them next day, and he said he'd had over 200 reports, and they're my experiences.
One of the most intriguing incidents of recent times occurred on the long, flat stretch of road known as the Nullarbor Highway, which cuts along the bottom of the Australian continent. It was in 1988 that a family of 4 set out to drive from Perth to Melbourne in their 2-litre sedan. What they claim happened to them became one of the most sensational UFO cases ever recorded. John Ockertell, a researcher based in Melbourne, was at the site of this encounter within hours. He takes up the story of what became known as the Knowles case.
On the 20th of January 1988, a family of four, it was a mother called Faye and her three sons, left Perth to drive all the way from Perth to Melbourne in one complete stint, about 3,500 kilometres. And they experienced this alleged UFO encounter. Now, the explosive started about 1:57 a.m. in the morning and went for about just under 2 hours worth of activity. And in that, they described a tremendous amount of events that occurred to them, starting off with seeing a glowing light in the middle of the road and then swerving to avoid it. Then the next thing they remember is this object being on the side of the road, and then going backwards and forwards while this object they claim was chasing them. Then at the very last moment, as they did one of their turns back towards Melbourne, they noticed the car seemed to lift up and start to fly. And then Faye puts her hand out of the car and touches something on the roof. And she said it was like a sponge. She distinctly remembers squeezing it. So it's quite eerie in a sense, but she put her hand back in and wound up the window. Not long after that occurred, the car filled up with black smoke. They got the feeling that their head was actually going to explode. They all started to talk like robots, they said. Then Pat looked over at Sean, who was driving, and Sean was unconscious at the steering wheel. His hands were off the steering wheel and his head was down, and the car, in their opinion, was still moving. And then they all described the car doing 200k, and then suddenly this feeling of being dropped out of the sky, hitting the ground, the wheel bursting, and then actually spinning off the road and stopping. Now, they actually got out of the car and ran to the bush and watched this object in the distance with a searchlight, following them, in the bush, searching for them. Then when that disappeared, they then hopped back in the vehicle and sped off to the next roadhouse. Now, that's when the encounter ends. When they got there, they had to refill the car because the car was out of fuel. Now, we did some measurements, and we discovered that half the tank was empty. They'd lost 260 k's worth of fuel. Also, they described this encounter being a fleeting thing. In fact, it took them 2 hours, and the journey shouldn't have taken that long. So they lost some incredible amount of time. Also, all this fuel. And they still, to this day, they cannot recall what happened to them in great detail.
One of the other things I find fascinating about that case is that very quickly the federal police became involved. Now, I find that most intriguing. Can you shed any light onto why the federal police would be called in for what looked like a puncher on the Nullarbor Desert?
No, it's enthralling. I think what happens on a lot of these things, when you've got to understand, when the police took that statement off them, they put themselves in a position of ridicule themselves, you see. So what we discovered with the South Australian police, they wouldn't investigate this case. They wouldn't get involved because they're too worried if they do that, they've got positions to uphold. Now, if you're chasing UFOs, these alleged things that don't exist, it's taxpayers' money. So I'll give you a good example of this. I did a case over called the Melton Police Encounter, which occurred over just west of Melbourne. There was, 3 or 4 divvy vans chasing this UFO. The area chief inspector was involved with it. It flew over the police station. The police officers made statements. I've got all their statements here. And I went back there the next day to, get some more statements from these people, and I had to arm my way through military people, investigating officers. The Department of Transport was there because it was an aerial phenomena. They're all out there to try to debug it as quickly as possible.
Bill Chalker comments.
There is about 3 or 4 different analyses that have been done of that Mundrabella material, and none of it, from a chemist's point of view, to my mind at least anyway, argues forcefully for it being alien or unusual, really unusual in nature. Mildly unusual perhaps, but not sufficient to support something truly unknown. Now, if the analysis had occurred in a carefully controlled fashion early enough, well, then we may have had something really interesting to look at. But because of the way the whole affair unfolded, tainted by the media circus. It was not an environment to do scientific work in.
Nevertheless, the Nullarbor remains of particular interest to UFO researchers. Contemporary investigators have targeted the region for its abundance of repeatable phenomena, such as Earth lights, events which have been linked to geophysical activity like the movement of the Earth's crust. Scientific data aside, this ancient flat space is a continuing source of powerful anecdotal evidence. Those who know this stretch better than most are the truckies who drive it dozens of times a year.
When I first started doing the Nullarbor Plains, I did hear a few stories, but I was a pretty sceptic at the time. But yeah, a few things did happen to me, which I didn't quite believe at the time, but after thinking about it and after reflecting back on these stories, which I heard from other people, there have been strange happenings, especially around Ceduna, where at night you'd be travelling and you may be talking to a driver hundreds of kilometres away, but when you're sort of looking back behind you and just to see if there was anything following you, maybe another truck, maybe a car who's got a radio that you could talk to, it seems strange that lights coming up from behind you was sort of following strangely. Most vehicles following you, whether you're in a car or in a truck or in a bus, you will always notice their lights are in your right-hand mirror. But it's very strange when you start to get them on your left-hand side too as well. And to have two lights following behind you, especially in a semi-trailer, you've got no inside rear view mirror. But when you have a single light on your right-hand mirror and a single light on your left-hand mirror, it has either got to be a very wide truck following you or a motorbike on your right-hand mirror and a motorbike in the grass following you, about the same width. Now, a truck coming up from behind you, they will always start to talk to you. But when you get two lights following behind you and they don't advance and they don't fall back, but it doesn't matter how fast you go, that distance is always maintained. And so you wonder what is following you. As I got to know drivers, they were saying not to stop anywhere near Ceduna because of strange happenings, and that if you do see strange happenings, don't worry about it, just keep your foot down and just keep going for it, just to get away from that area.
Could you be specific about these strange happenings? I mean, as a truck driver, you know, a lot of truckies out there, it's quite well known, use a number of drugs to keep to their schedules, which are quite rigid, and a lot of the time they're racing against the clock with their load. This is not something that you dismiss as like a truckie hallucinating or something.
Yeah, the blokes which I normally used to talk to down towards that way, they weren't heavily into drugs at all. They were family men too as well. But some of the stories that they were saying were about flickering lights coming up on the inside, sort of parallel with them. But it was only white lights, which some of them were talking about. Others would talk about red, green and blue flickering lights, like lights that were dancing.
And now to a most peculiar story. Last night on the lonely Nullarbor Plain, an Australian national freight train heading for Western Australia lost power and finally stopped altogether. It was delayed for 2 hours, apparently because of mechanical failure. But the train's crew were convinced the train was stopped by an unidentified flying object.
The drivers were claiming that they saw lights, like dancing lights, moving from either side of the train ahead of them, in a distance ahead of them. They couldn't be very specific on shapes or sizes of the lights. It was just probably the best way to describe it would have been a sensation of light out in front of them.
What sort of country were they in at the time, and what sort of weather was it?
They're in sand dune country. Weather-wise, I'm not exactly certain, but it was sand dune country, and the track was bending through this hilly, sandy country.
Well, I understand that the train slowed down even though the motor was still going. Do you know any more about that?
Apparently now it seems that there had been some problems with the engine. There was a loss of power. The engine was still running. Bear that in mind. All the way through this, the claim has been made that the engine was running the whole way through, but the power wasn't being transferred to the wheels.
In mid-1994, members of an independent research group, Alert, myself included, spent time on the Nullarbor recording related anecdotes. What follows are the stories of ordinary people who live and work in this remote part of Australia.
We are.
At the moment, Michael's running his cameras on what he called bulb, which I take it is a fancy term for time-lapse.
It's got a bulb written on it with bulb next to it.
B?
Bulb, yeah, with bulb.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So what, we'd estimate it's about 8 p.m?
Something like that.
7:38 p.m, Thursday the 7th of July. And we're sitting out for the second night, and it's beginning to seem a little futile because for two reasons. Michael spoke today to Craig, the guy who pumps the gas, and he saw this thing last night whilst we were looking straight in that direction with our cameras set up and our equipment, and we saw nothing. Now, Michael got a bit pragmatic with him and said to him, listen, what distance was it from the evening star, which they term the evening star, which is the brightest star in the sky? Now, we're looking, I can see it right now, and I can't see a bleeding thing. Crew?
Nothing.
No.
Not a thing.
Unless we're in the wrong dimension of, or conscious mode of thinking, I don't know.
Okay. And also, we've got a story from Ros, is it?
Roslyn, yeah.
Roslyn, who's the girlfriend of Troy.
And Troy is the...
Roo shooter.
Roo and rabbit shooter for the Mundrabilla homestead.
Which is 1 million acres run by Bob and his wife. Didn't get her name.
No, I didn't
How many
either.
kids are there?
There's two. We saw them driving a mini moke, and they must have been no older than 10. Did you see that?
Yeah. We kept on driving from Troy's house back to the main house.
So you spend the whole night on your own?
Yeah, that's right.
It must be quite a lonely occupation in many ways, yeah?
Yeah, it is a bit. I've got a radio and that, so I talk to a few fellas around the other shooters and other station owners and that on the radio, which makes it a bit better.
All right. We're curious about a lot of the stories that go way, way back about this area. There have been odd stories to do with, like, min lights. Have you ever seen anything yourself out here that falls into that category?
The only thing I've ever seen, which I don't know if it was a UFO or what it was, the only strange thing I seen was one night I was out shooting, and because you're licensed for one property, there's only one shooter, so anyone else that is on there is poaching your land. I seen lights out there, and they were due east from me, and I looked at them through the scope of the rifle, and they come up in two squares, almost like a window with two windows of a house. So I thought for sure that it must have been a shooter. So I chased after this thing for probably 2 hours, and I drove almost to Eucla, and I just couldn't get any closer to it. Each time I stopped and had a look at it, it was still due east and still just see the two square lights.
So no explanation for that whatsoever?
No, I've seen a similar thing to that when I was at Royal Inner, but I don't know what it was. It could have been someone camped, or I don't know. You know, you couldn't really say that it was a UFO.
Right.
And I was talking to another shooter not long ago, and I asked him just out of the blue whether he had seen anything strange, and he explained the exact same thing to me, but his wasn't white light. The one I seen was white. He seen orange.
And did he try to chase that, or did it sustain speed? Or?
Yeah, he followed it. Well, he's seen it in the distance and thinking the same thing as what I thought. He thought it was a poacher. He followed it, and he hit the boundary fence of another station, and he couldn't go any further, but he just couldn't. It was the same thing. It just seemed to stay the same distance from him.
Right. Gee, that's highly unusual. I spoke to you yesterday, and you've got a bit of a theory yourself for a lot of the lights that people see, and it's got something to do with the fact that this land is so flat and so vast.
Because it is so flat and the air seems to be so clear here, like you can see the stars like here, like I've never seen anywhere else. You know, I think you get a misconception of distance. Like the roadhouse, you can see direct light, not just glow, but direct light 15 kilometres away from it. And, well, I've had times when I've been out shooting and I've seen a flash of light in the sky and thought that was someone poaching, and I've sat there and watched it for a while, and it just keeps flashing in the one spot. And after I got home, had a look at the map, and I was dead in line with a bend in the highway, and the highway was 30 kilometres away. And I just put it down to the trucks coming around the corner on the bend of the highway, and the lights just flashing on the horizon. Especially if you get fog, you can get, the light can take on weird shapes. I've seen spotlights from other shooters going straight up in the air, and you'll have the main shaft coming up like a tree trunk, and then when it hits the fog, it just mushrooms out like almost like a mushroom, almost like a atomic explosion. The only other thing that I have seen a lot of, which could explain for a lot of them, is meteorites coming through the atmosphere. I've seen a hell of a lot of them. They're always the same. They've always got a green ball with a green tail with little red sparkles coming off it. And some of them are dull, some of them are that bright that they'll light the field up like it can be a pitch black night, and they'll light the paddock up like as if it's a full moon night.
So they've actually hit on land around here, you'd assume?
Well, you'd assume, but whether they disintegrate before they hit. I found a couple of places which I've thought were meteorite landings, but when you tell people, they seem to look at you strange. But I showed you the photos of some that I have seen down on the beach.
Yeah. How do you find, are people out here pretty open to talk about strange things that they see, or is it something you just pass off as a bit of a joke?
No, not really, no. It is a fairly big joke because it's been so popular, like they have signs on the road and that saying that this is UFO territory and that, but I think that alone would probably get a lot of people's imaginations going. When they see that sign, they start to look for things that maybe they see that aren't there.
Yeah, I can see lots of things in the visitor's book at the roadhouse saying, I didn't see a UFO, I'm pissed off, So, there's heaps of entries like that.
The thing that interests me that I would like to know is there's a fellow in Boulder that died, I think, last year, and he was known as the meteorite king, and he sort of found up to 9,000 meteorites out here on the Nullarbor, and I'd like to know, why do they land on the Nullarbor? Why don't they land in Queensland? Why don't they land around Perth? And you never seem to hear of anyone even finding one over that way.
It's about around midnight. We're now seated about 50 yards away from the Mundrabilla Roadhouse, which is the roadhouse that the Knowles family drove into after their incident just outside of Majura Pass. Anyhow, that noise you can hear in the background is the generator. It's sort of nicely phase shifting in the air out here, that runs the Mundrabilla Roadhouse. We've been set up here since 5:30 p.m. waiting for suspected light phenomena that was articulated to us last night by one of the girls that works in the Roadhouse. She saw it the night before, and we've also spoken to other people over the last day or so who've told us other stories of repeated light phenomena. One that one of the locals, a gentleman who's a farmer down the road from here, calls the evening star. It's very cold. We're exhausted. It's the time in the morning where you think, gee, what are we doing as ufologists? Is this a futile quest? The search for the Holy Grail? But on the other hand, the sky is full of wonders, and we're enjoying those at the moment. I'm just having a word with Basil and Sheila here at the Mundrabilla Roadhouse, which is the place that the Knowles family drove into. And Basil today, around lunchtime, informed me that he came in very soon after the Knowles incident had occurred. Could you just explain a bit about that, Basil, what you were doing? And you were driving the road, what, 8 hours after?
It would have been, I suppose, 7 or 8 hours afterwards. We got into Mundrabilla here, a little curious. I was filling up with petrol and spoke to the service station bloke here and asked him what was going on up the road. The thing that sticks in my mind about his account of the business was that he said they had a dog with them, and that the dog was literally pushed up as hard, had forced itself up as hard and as far as it could get under the driver's feet. And he said he'd never ever seen a dog so terrified ever before. The other thing he mentioned was a very, very strong smell of ozone, which is that spark you get with electric flashes and electric discharges. Talking around further with some of the other locals and with this bloke, that it's not a thing that's joked about that much around here. There's every now and then there's apparently some report of something or other a bit unusual does come up.
Okay, I'm just having a word with Colin Knox
one of the people who runs the Mundrabilla Roadhouse, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a roadhouse. We have motels, cabins, caravan park, a mini zoo. It's a rest stop, restaurant, hotel, motel.
Right. This area, as you'd be well aware, because you've got your teaspoons and your stickers and everything, has been associated for a long time with everything from mysterious lights to UFOs. I'm just wondering if you have any stories or you've seen anything yourself in this area in the time you've been around. Did you used to drive through here?
I did. I drove on this road for 12 years as a driver and an owner driver. For 12 years I spent out here.
Right. I suppose one of the interesting things is just last night, and we've been in this area now for 7 days looking for anything unusual, and we keep losing it. You know, we're in some other position somewhere else. You guys witnessed something unusual last night in the sky. Could you explain that to us?
Yeah, well, it happened about 7 days ago. We saw the same thing. It was just above the escarpment. It was a bright light, and it was turning orange. And at first I thought it was Dougie, the rabbit shooter. But when I came back here, he was still inside. We went out to have a look, and he said it was the evening star. But when he turned his back and walked away, the evening star disappeared. And we all know the evening star don't disappear.
Yeah, it actually goes down over the back of the horizon.
Then we did see it again last night.
Yeah, well, it was brought to my attention by the other people who own the roadhouse, and I went outside. And it was the most unusual light. It was quite some distance away. What the distance was, I wouldn't have a clue. But because it was a really dark night and there was no other forms of distraction in the sky, that this object was very, very obvious.
And what happened towards the end? Did the object move down over the escarpment, or?
Yeah, well, I had to. I was in and out of the roadhouse, and we watched it for quite some time, and left one of the other ladies more or less to keep an eye on it, and it just faded out. It just went.
So you were ducking in and out to make sort of the dinners for the evening whilst watching this thing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, life still goes on no matter what's out there.
Absolutely, yes. Otherwise, everybody would have starved.
We heard all these stories. One of them that we got Bob, the property owner, to write down on a map about a crater that looks like it was dug out of the ground by an earth-moving machine, but there's never been an earth-moving machine down in this spot.
It's too remote. There's no reason for it to be there.
And
and they both remarked about it. And Bob's a fairly straight sort of guy, and
very straightforward.
Straightforward, down the line sort of guy, and he sort of, was keen to write it down on the map and tell us all about it. I think he's fairly logical, and he's probably seen a few meteor craters, and he thinks it's a very strange crater, and because it has these ridges, and he said like a grader has been through it, but can't understand why one would be down there. It's a very large hole in the ground. So that's quite near the water. It's off the road towards the Bight. Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to go down and have a look at it.
Nice falling star there.
Missed it?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I've got this overwhelming thing, are we being had on by the community around here? Are they all pulling our leg? Because there's a lot of stories and there's a lot of legs to pull. Who knows? Because they're not forthcoming with heaps of information. And that's probably because no one ever stays more than one day. And if they do, then they work on the property.
Yeah.
Or something, in the roadhouse.
At the roadhouse. But we've still got to get their trust. I mean, it takes a while. We're still strangers from out of town. And they'd have a very...
All right, just having a word with Bob, who runs the Mundrabilla Homestead. Could you tell us a bit about this property, Bob, and when you came here?
Well, we came here about 8 years ago. There's been several instances here that were reported as vehicles being picked up and this type of thing, but there could be another theory there too, that the person had driven from Esperance, which is 9 hours from here, and it was a time of the year when we were experiencing fogs, and they could have just plain run off the road.
But they were terrified.
They were terrified. I know they were terrified.
You don't leave your luggage behind, all your goods. you know, he has it that there was nothing in that, but I don't agree.
That was actually only 7 kilometres from your...
7 kilometres west from here, and I was actually not here at the time because I'd caught a bus that night to Perth, and I rang home next day to say that I'd arrived safely, and Lucy asked me if I'd read the papers because all hell had broken loose here. There were federal police.
Why are police coming for an unusual...
I don't know. They had witches' hats on the road, and for weeks afterwards the buses cashed in on it. They'd stop at the actual site, and everybody would get out and investigate, and on one account one of the passengers said to another, "Yes, I can feel it, you can feel it, can't you?" As if there was still a presence there. There is a guy that was working out here for some time. He was certainly hooked on them, and he used to sit in the dark in the middle of the night in his ute and wait for them to come, but...
Did he claim success?
Yes.
Yes, he did, yeah.
Did he believe he was in the right spot, or was he inducing them from concentrating, or...
Well, no, he believed that they may come and get him even one day. I think that he was reported as saying to his wife, if I ever disappear totally, you know that they've come to take me.
Was that in this region here when he was doing
Yes,
it?
it was, yeah.
Liz, I'm curious to hear you say, about the Knowles case, that you think there's something to it. Because originally when we came to speak to Bob, I was telling him that very close to that time, there were 2 other cases that were quite identical.
Exactly, and on the same evening of the Knowles business, there were sightings, weren't there, out at sea, all over the place.
There is an interesting thing that I witnessed years ago. I was at a barbecue in Broken Hill, and it was at the home of a mine manager, and there were mine managers from several other mines there at the same time. And it was a very pleasant evening, and there was a light in the sky, and there was absolute silence. And these mine managers said, after the light had disappeared, after about 10 minutes of moving in the sky, it's following the lines of load. The mineral lines of load. And that was something that's always stuck with me. And whether there was some magnetic field that was attracting it to follow these lines of load, or whether it was an exploratory thing from somewhere, who knows?
It's getting towards science rather than saying all these managers are hallucinating at the same time. It's getting a little bit more scientific.
It was early in the evening, they weren't. They may have been later, but they weren't.
There's a chance increasing, was there?
The chance increased, yes.
I've heard some of these rums are like that too, aren't they? Bundaberg rum can induce aerial phenomena too sometimes.
I believe it can, but in fact there was a station owner further along the track after the Knowles business, and he was offering overnight accommodation, and he'd throw the bundy in and he could guarantee that they'd see a light.
I'll take that one up, I think.
But what about old Alan Stewart? His belief is so strong, isn't it?
It is.
Totally.
Yes, well, he showed you a hole in his face where they plugged in and drained his strength or something.
Is it the guy that got zapped?
Can you tell us about the guy that got zapped worked for us. You Luce, because I was away.
Oh, he was terrified. It was daylight. Yeah.
Where he had to go, yeah.
This way?
I don't know how he had skin off his hands trying to get back into the vehicle. His hands were all bleeding, so
He was in that much of a rush.
Yeah.
Is he a very practical type of guy, I guess?
No. He was a bit of a girl. Different.
He had a bandana.
Yeah, he was a handsome young bloke, and he set our daughter's heart aflutter for the time that he was here. but he was terrified. He saw a light and he saw a craft hovering.
4 in the afternoon. 4 in the afternoon.
I heard the car, of his black vehicle, I heard it coming, and the speed, I thought he was going to go off the edge of the escarpment.
Was he terrified, was he?
Absolutely. Absolutely couldn't talk. But yeah, because I don't disbelieve, I've got to admit. It's just too much. It happens too often.
Yeah.
Still, somehow, it just doesn't seem to belong, you know? The desert's full of things that don't belong.
The apparently benign and curious nature of many of these experiences can be misleading. The increase of reported encounters that involve abductions and even internal examinations are obviously at the most contentious end of the spectrum. They also tend to be the most easily ridiculed by the popular media. Whatever the reality of these reports, the fact remains that a significant number of individuals from a variety of backgrounds have undergone an experience which has left them traumatized and isolated.
Telling me, don't be afraid. Stay there. You keep looking. Did you hear him tell you that? Oh, no, he didn't say it. You felt he said it. I know. I'll take it in my head. All right. Pull it out the little way. God, give me that. All right. Hold down. Run! Hold it down. Down and run. God. It does like God. Give me that. I gotta get away. Oh. All right. Calm down. I'm trying. Calm down. Get away. Calm down. You're still asleep.
Our program finishes with a dramatic personal story from a woman involved in an incident which took place in the Dandenong foothills of Victoria in August of 1993. What is significant about Kelly Carl's story is that it was verified several months later by an independent series of witnesses with whom she had never been in contact. Here's Kelly's experience in her own words.
And I was witness to a very big, craft, which had landed in a field on the side of a country Victorian road. And I was also witness to what appeared to be, I guess I could say, a group of non-human entities. I wasn't the only witness. Another car with 3 other people in it pulled up behind us about 100 metres down the road, and they got out and crossed the road the same as I did. Apparently, all they consciously remember was seeing the craft, a whole heap of tall black beings, and then hearing a humming noise and blacking out, then finding themselves back in their car again. I have a little more conscious recollection than that, but because time doesn't allow it, I won't go into details, but I will say that the fear that I felt that night was something that I could never have believed a human being capable of feeling. I was absolutely terrified. There were physical marks left on at least 3 of us. I think the most extraordinary one on myself was a red triangle beneath my navel, which was there for about 3 or 4 months. Later on, there was also physical traces discovered on the actual field in soil samples and magnetometer readings. So this was definitely a physical event. I thought at first I just thought I was going nuts. But it wasn't until the other people in the other car reported the incident several months after I did that I was finally able to quite regain my sanity. I wasn't going crazy after all, not unless 3 complete strangers were going crazy along with me. We were all researched separately, but the date, place, and even our drawings of the craft and the beings coincided. And this in itself is saying something, because the beings we saw weren't the mass media circulated little grey things, but 6 to 7 foot tall and black, and really only heard of in research circles. All I could remember, actually, at first was seeing this craft hovering above the road, which my husband saw as well, and then a couple of kilometres down the road driving into this bright light, and then totally excited, the adrenaline pumping, and then all of a sudden nothing. And arguing with my husband all the way home. I feel like I've had a blackout. Weren't we going to see a UFO? And he's saying, I think so. And we really didn't know what happened. And it wasn't until, when I got home that evening, I had the triangular mark on my body, and I'd also started bleeding, which ended up putting me in hospital 3.5 weeks later with an infection in the womb, which is, it's not a normal female gynecological problem. You either have to have had pregnancy, which is self-terminated, or from recent surgery, and I'd had neither, and all the pregnancy tests and everything came back negative, as I knew they would, so yes, that was quite unusual, but it wasn't until later on in September that I was actually able to remember what happened between that light and sitting in the car feeling very strange and asking my husband what happened. Yeah, anyway, I think with myself, the hardest thing I think I've had to deal with is always having to be very careful about who I speak with. And it really bugs me. Why should I have to hide the truth from people? I mean, if I'd witnessed a stabbing in a back alley, no one would doubt my word at all. But because the topic is UFOs, people automatically think that you're deluded. I've always been a very logical, even possibly cynical person to do with anything to do with, I suppose, strange phenomena. But I've had a first-hand experience here. It's literally turned my logic inside out. I question everything now. I question whether everything I've been taught and brought up to believe is actually truth or not. This was not supposed to happen. This was not supposed to be something that was real, yet it was. Therefore, I suppose my whole attitude towards everything in my life has changed. Well, something is going on, and it is real. It's very, very real. There are hundreds of abductees in Australia, and every year, literally thousands of UFO sightings are reported. So, I guess all I can really say is, wake up, Australia. This isn't an American fantasy. It's an Australian reality.
Kelly's case is now part of an ongoing study being conducted by Bill Chalker and the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. While late 20th century society endeavours to maintain a respectable distance from such accounts, for Kelly and the many like her, there remains the challenge of coming to terms with an irreversible shift in their perception of the world.
Circular. Aircraft.
Well, thank you for your patience. You have actually lived through. To Catch a Flying Star, that brought back so many memories. I was starting getting quite emotional there. Produced by Matthew Leonard for Radio I on Radio National here, part of the Australian Broadcasting Commission in the mid-90s. The music done by Anthony Marr and myself, not even under the moniker of Jay Katz then, although we were using Jay Katz at our Sounds of Seduction nights.
And Moodaramas. Doing Moodaramas.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
it's all good.
Anyway, an incredible radio program. We thank you for your patience to sit through that. It's the first time we've done, our podcast without pictures, really, for that main half.
We do like a show and tell, don't we? Oh,
I did bring a few things back from that time on the Nullarbor. And this tea towel's bleeding through the green, but you can see what is actually a sign. Have I got that properly?
That's yeah.
You can see that sign there?
Yeah.
That sign was on the air highway.
That's the sign. Anyway.
Next 111 kilometres, you're going to experience UFO phenomena. Very Australian and beautifully rendered there on that tea towel from the Nullarbor. What an incredible experience. So Anthony Marr, Michael Williams did infrared photography. As I said before, you can check out that incredible issue of
40 and Times.
40 and Times, issue 213. The Wonderful Weirdness of Oz. Michael's pictures are in there. And I think what we should do is quickly hit our membership promo. Aspasia, you're on Untold Radio. This is episode 45.
Hey, Untold Radio Network fans. Want exclusive perks and to support our channel?
Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
Well, there you go. Legend meets science. Doug nearly lost his life last week. Aspasia, flying out of a remote location, shooting Legend meets Science 2.
Yep.
And boy, is that going to be an exciting documentary. But
Can't
be
wait for
careful, people. Be careful out there in the remote wilderness. Well, apart from, just pondering there what Philip K. Dick could have been on about. And I think maybe what we should do is get David Thrussell from Snog and Black Lung. And he did an incredible lecture for us and UFO Research New South Wales, where he spoke about AI and the computer basically being the alien invasion. And he was heavily into the work of Philip K. Dick.
Yes, he was.
So maybe we'll get him to expound in one of our future episodes.
That'd be good.
All
Very
right.
interesting.
Okay.
All right. We will be back next week with more goodies.
Hopefully with Dean Bennett.
Hopefully.
Yeah, thank
that'll
you
be
so
great.
much for your patience. That's the first time we did radio without pictures.
That's right.
You're on Untold Radio. This is Down South Anomalies. My name's Jay Katz, sometimes Jaimie Leonarder. And, well, my beautiful wife, Aspasia.
And we'll be back next week with more
Stay
goodies.
safe. Much love.
Bye.